Hi, this video is a media analysis of Benjamin Netanyahu's plan to annex the Jordan Valley if he wins re-election as Israel's Prime Minister. To do this, I will be looking at three different media sources: an article from the Times of Israel, an article from the BBC, and a news clip from Al Jazeera. So, the Times of Israel article headlined UN Chief says West Bank annexation would violate international law is written by agencies and Times of Israel staff. It doesn't have one discernible author. And now the Times of Israel is an Israeli-based, mainly English language online news organization, which was founded in 2012. The newspaper states that it has no political affiliations and is an independent and non-biased publication. The BBC News article, which is headlined Arab Nations Condemn Netanyahu's plan to annex the Jordan Valley, is also written by staff. It doesn't state one author. And the BBC is a British public broadcaster, which has a very reputable international organisation as being independent and impartial when reporting on news stories. And the Al Jazeera clip is mainly reported by Harry Fawcett from West Jerusalem on the day that Netanyahu announced the plan. The two written articles were written the day after Netanyahu announced the plan. Now, Al Jazeera is a Qatari-based state-funded news organisation, but it does state that it is independent of the government and is not a government spokesman. And it does have a good international reputation as being an independent and impartial news organisation. But Qatar is a Muslim country, which will affect how it frames certain issues, particularly ones around Israel and the Israeli-Palestine conflict. So to look at a media analysis, it's important to look at how the articles frame the issue. So here the issue is Netanyahu's announcing a plan to annex the Jordan Valley. And the bigger international law issues at play here include sovereignty and the threatened use of force. So the articles frame this issue in a way that positions viewers against Netanyahu's plan. It does not frame it in a positive way at all. And it really paints Netanyahu's plan in a bad light and as against the peace process and against other countries around the world. So the Times of Israel and the BBC article are similar in the way they frame the issue. They both use very similar quotes from the same people. So they have quotes from the UN Secretary General, they have quotes from the Palestinian Authority, and they also have quotes from the Foreign Secretary for Jordan and Saudi Arabia. So these quotes all talk about how if the plan was to go ahead, it would be a violation of international law. It would destroy the peace process between Israel and Palestine, and it would destroy any chance of there being a two-state solution. So it's slightly surprising that the Times of Israel article is framed this way. It's framed against the plan and does not paint it in a positive light, because as an Israeli-based newspaper, one would think that it would be more positive to Netanyahu. And the article is not anti-Israel in any way, but it is quite scathing of Netanyahu's plan. But when you look at it in the broader context of how many in Israel do feel about Netanyahu, the fact that they've had to go to a second election within 1 year shows that he doesn't have a majority approval rating in the country. And so when it's put in that context, it makes more sense. And the BBC article provides a little bit more background to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and gives a brief history of the occupation of the West Bank and the Jordan Valley itself, and how Israel would always want to keep some sort of presence in the Jordan Valley as a security buffer to other countries in the Middle East. So Al Jazeera, on the other hand, frames the issue of the plan to annex the Jordan Valley in the same way as the Times of Israel and the BBC do, but they focus more on domestic media outlets rather than international reaction to it. So in the news clip, they talk about how once domestic news organizations realized that this was a political election grab to gain more support from the far right in order to win the election, many news outlets turned off the speech and began essentially mocking Netanyahu's plan. They see it as just an election promise that he won't ever be able to stick to. And Harry Fawcett, the Al Jazeera journalist, also notes how Netanyahu made a similar promise to annex Israeli settlements in the West Bank in April before the first election, and how nothing came of that. So it's quite scathing of Netanyahu in the way it's framed. It frames it as an empty promise and something he won't be able to follow through on, and also does bring it back to the larger issue of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, but more from a domestic standpoint rather than international reaction to it. So, as I've mentioned, the broader international issue at play behind Netanyahu's plan to annex the Jordan Valley is the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. So the BBC and the Times of Israel focus a lot on this. The quotes mention it, they provide background to it in their articles and give a brief history. And they also talk about the political climate as well. And Al Jazeera talks more about the election itself rather than the conflict explicitly, but it does all relate back into the broader Israeli-Palestinian conflict. So Netanyahu is obviously the main figure within this news issue, and he's portrayed and framed as someone who's trying to win an election. It's essentially seen as a power grab and a way to shore up support and win the election. Whether he would actually follow through with it is unclear. He stated when announcing the plan that if he wins the election, it would be a mandate to do this. But he's also portrayed through the quotes that the UN Secretary General gives, as well as the Palestinian Authority, as someone who doesn't want peace in the region or a way to resolve the conflict with Palestine. It's seen as very much an Israel first approach, and that what Israel wants, Israel will do, and won't have any thought to other countries in the region or international law. Whereas the Palestinians and other countries, though they aren't portrayed particularly in a certain way, they come across as more rational, more wanting peace compared to Israel. Their quotes all focus around peace and how what Israel's doing is a declaration of war. That's something that the Palestinians said, and that they will need to defend themselves. So it immediately portrays them as victims from acts perpetrated by Israel and frames them in a more positive light for readers and viewers. You're going to feel more sympathetic towards them, essentially. And they all talk about how Netanyahu is violating international law by doing what he would plan to do, essentially. One of the things that I think is missing from the articles is domestic reaction to it. And while this is an international law issue in the sense of the sovereignty and the plan to annex the Jordan Valley, none of the articles, look at how domestic voters or people in Israel view the plan, whether they approve it, whether they don't. This is probably more of a timing thing than anything else, because they all came out within a day of Netanyahu announcing this plan, which is probably the main reason. But as you can see, 3 news sources can all report on a particular issue in very similar ways and can frame it very similarly, but also have quite a lot of differences in how they report it to people. Thank you.